Maybe don't know.
This time, this time, this time, this time, this time to build, this time to build, this time to build, this time, this time to build, this time to build, this time to build, this time, power, this time to build, power, this time to build, power, this time to build, power.
What's up, everybody? I'm your host, Chris Hampton. Welcome to episode 75 of the Power Company Podcast, brought to you by PowerCompanyClimbing.com. I am here in lovely Lander, Wyoming, which most of you now know is home, and I am nursing a minor finger injury. Mild to moderate strain of my A2 pulley in my middle finger. But I talked with my friend and doctor of physical therapy, Carrie Cooper, and she gave me some rehab work, which I've been doing diligently, as should all of you who are injured, and it's feeling pretty damn good. It's only been a week, not even quite a week, so I have high hopes. Shouldn't be much longer, and I'll be back to climbing, at least low intensity, so not a big deal. And actually, I'm not too frustrated about it because it's given me a really good chance to work on some other things, including our Core for Climbers ebook, as well as a few other projects that have been in need of attention, like refining my presentation for the Performance Climbing Coach Seminar, which happens in Columbia, Maryland, April 6th to 8th. I'll be there talking about coaching movement skills and mindset, alongside Steve Bechtel, Tyler Nelson, Neely Quinn, Charlie Manganello. And this one looks like it's going to fill up for sure. So get signed up if you're interested. You can do that at climbstrong.com. And I'm tentatively planning on being out there on the East Coast for a week or so after. So I'm just about to start reaching out to other area gyms. So if you happen to be a coach, a gym manager, whatever, and you might be interested in having Nate and I do some work with your youth team or your gym community in April, hit me up, PowerCompanyClimbing.com. Hit that contact tab. That goes directly to me for now. Today's guest, Heather Weidner, doesn't really need an introduction. She's one of America's best sport climbers and recently joined a small group of women to have climbed 514 trad with her ascent of China Doll in Dream Canyon, Colorado. And it's that ascent that led to this conversation with Heather, more specifically, the film that was made about it, directed by John Glassberg and written by Caroline Treadway. And if you haven't seen the film, then pause this, watch it, and then come back. I don't want to say too much here, but I'm definitely going to have a lot of thoughts on the other side. So let's get into it.
I'm never going to just nail it. All of a sudden, I'm going to be like so solid. No, it's like always a process. I'll always be working on it.
I think I'm glad you're willing to talk about it.
Yeah, pretty open about
when I saw the film, well, first off, congrats.
Thank you so much.
On sending. China Doll looks amazing and is a dream route for sure.
Thanks. Yeah. I'm glad it's done.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, it's been just about a year and a half now. It's kind of crazy.
Those big projects take a toll on you mentally.
Oh, yeah.
Emotionally.
Absolutely. So, yeah. For about a year, I couldn't do much of any projecting. So finally feeling ready.
Yep. And when I saw the film, I was like, and I think a lot of people have had this experience watching it, that there's this mix of emotions. Like you're super stoked for you pushing so hard. And then there's this element of yours and Chris's relationship and you having all these self-doubts and being really hard on yourself. And there are times when it seems like Chris isn't helping the situation. So I left I finished watching the film with sort of a, I don't even know how to put it, but not necessarily a bad taste in my mouth, but a little bit confusing. And especially in today's climate where there's like this, push toward gender equality and, men not being so much like men, so stereotypical. It seemed like strange timing. And then I read your blog and I was kind of blown away. Like, why wasn't this the film? Like, why wasn't what she's saying here the film? Because this is amazing. And it sounds like maybe you had the same experience when you watched the film.
Yeah, absolutely. It was interesting because when I first watched the film, I was kind of in that post-Send haze, and I think it was even before a lot of the gender inequality uprising was happening.
Yep.
And then I watched it again like months later before it was going to come out.
Yeah.
And I just started bawling, mostly because I felt really, really sad for that girl in the film.
Yeah.
I felt like I had changed a lot since the film was made and since I did that project. And I just had this like overwhelming sense of deep sadness for that person in the film. And it was also interesting because I showed it to a few people, and one of my closest friends just told me straight up that she didn't like it at all.
Yeah.
That she saw what you were kind of talking about, like a little bit of the portrayal of Chris being overbearing and kind of this like mentor role, and a lot of like the credit in a lot of ways was put on the male in this film,
right?
Which I think can be so typical. And it's funny that you say, "Gosh, why wasn't the film more like what I had written about?" And Caroline Treadway, who wrote the film, in part with John Glassberg, I think she really intended it to bring awareness that women often don't have as much confidence in themselves as they should.
Right.
But I think instead it came away a little bit different, and everyone interprets it a little differently too. So it is confusing.
Yeah.
I felt after I watched the movie later and was like bawling, I was like, this doesn't make sense. Like I need to like set this straight, and I need to tell everyone that is going to be watching this how I felt about it.
Yeah.
It's always tough when, someone's making a film about you. It's their piece of art, right?
Totally.
And so there were a lot of things that were very real about the film, but also a lot of inaccuracies too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it, no discredit at all to Caroline or John. I know that as a creative myself, I know that it's scary to put anything you make out into the world, and for you to be the subject of this thing that's being put out into the world has got to be scary as well. But I don't know what Caroline's goal was necessarily. If it was to bring awareness, I mean, it did make me really aware.
Yeah.
Maybe not in the way she intended it to, but it did put the focus on that, and it did start conversation.
Yeah.
I had quite a few conversations with the other coaches that I work with and with a lot of my friends just about, watch this film, let's talk about it, because it's leaving me with a bit of a bad taste in my mouth, and I want to talk about that. And through all those conversations, I said, I have to talk to Heather.
That's so cool.
We've got to get together and talk about this, because it's a little bit surprising and a little bit sad. I think you put it right.
Yeah.
I felt sad for that girl.
Right. And I think one of the main goals for John and Caroline was to produce something that was outside of the normal mold of climbing movies, which I think it really did a great job of. Here's this girl who just went and climbed this 514 trad climb. Like, why doesn't she have this, overt confidence,
Right.
Even after achieving this huge goal? And I think exposing that is important to everyone, because it doesn't matter what you achieve in your life or what you accomplish. Ultimately, you feeling good about yourself, quote unquote, good about yourself,
Right.
comes from something different.
Yeah, totally.
So,
And I think it does magnify that quite a bit,
Yeah.
And I understand the difficulty in dealing with a subject like that. They were willing to struggle through figuring out how to make the film say what it said, whether they achieved that or not, the same as I struggle through trying to have difficult conversations on the podcast or, in my songs or whatever it is.
For sure.
So
that's what makes it kind of meaningful and valuable.
Yeah.
I think just having that sense of deep vulnerability, whereas a lot of times in the social media world today, it's easy to think that, all we see is the good stuff. Everyone's happy, and then sometimes I'm left with this bad taste in my mouth, like, well, what's wrong with me? Why can't I be like these people, so successful all the time and so happy and whatnot? So for me, it's therapeutic to have a real openness with others. And I think it's important for all people to stay vulnerable, stay open, and I think it helps everybody in the end.
Totally. Now, when you watched it those several months later, before it, the final cut or whatever, before it came out, did you watch it with Chris?
I didn't actually. I was with my one of my best friends, one of my best girlfriends, and it was hard because she brought up the fact that the movie seemed to really expose just one part of my personality in the, darkest way. And she told me, which I believe is true, 98% of the time, I'm very positive and super outgoing and, up for anything and supportive of people. And the movie kind of portrayed one aspect of my personality.
Yeah.
And she was worried that people would think, oh, that's what people are going to think of you. That's all they're going to see from this movie, because, I don't have the pleasure of hanging out with everybody that,
Sure.
watches the movie. So that was her concern for me, is that it seemed really just one-sided.
Yeah.
And I totally understand that.
For sure.
Yeah.
Did you talk to Chris about your reservations with it?
We talked about it together a bit, and we think of it kind of as opening a little diary into our personal lives. I mean, there were some really intimate and tender moments in there, mixed in with a little bit of tension too.
Yeah.
And I think one of the hard things when I rewatched the movie too is Chris and I had gone through a tough time in our relationship. And so watching it again and seeing those tender moments on the film for everyone else to see was really hard.
Yeah.
Because at that time, I just wanted to be like, hey, relationships are really hard. They're never perfect. And, as sappy as, showing our engagement on the film was and everything, it was just difficult for that to be out there.
Yeah. And especially, climbing is a really emotional thing anyway, we're very attached to it with our emotions, and and I'm speaking in grand gestures here, but men and women express those emotions differently or deal with them differently. And I think that's really highlighted when you're climbing and trying something really hard.
Yeah.
Especially if the two of you are working on it together.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I really like that you touched on this point, because I feel like a lot of couples struggle with this.
Yeah.
And when the stakes are high and there's this little aspect of competitiveness between the partners, it just becomes really intense. And for instance, my biggest breakdowns would be with Chris, in the past versus another person. And probably because it is such an intimate relationship, but it's also not really fair to that person. And it's an interesting dynamic in a lot of ways. It's like the coolest thing ever because you get to like share all these different aspects of your life with your partner. But in another sense, I value my time climbing with other people and my girlfriends especially so much. And it's such a different dynamic. I think sometimes men and women in general, there's like a little competitiveness, and there's also like, for me, this feeling like I need to like impress my husband or something.
Right.
And it's so silly to say that, but it's true. It's different than when I'm with my girlfriends and we're just like so psyched for each other and like just straight up supportive.
Yeah, my fiance made an observation at the Red a couple of years ago that really kind of set me on this path to trying to figure out how to be a better, more effective climbing partner for her. And that was that, you know, we were out climbing and we've all experienced this moment where I said something to her about, you know, a positive encouragement, and she's like, "Shut up," you know?
Yeah.
And then my friend Dave said the exact same words, and she's like, "Thanks, Dave. That was great." And I was like, "What?"
Yeah.
And when she came down, she's like, "You know what? When you said it, it was an emotional trigger. It wasn't a bad emotional trigger, but it was more emotion. And I was already at my utmost with emotion up there.
Yeah.
So I couldn't process it as anything but overload."
I totally get that.
When Dave talked, I heard him. There was no emotion.
Yeah.
It was great.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, it's funny. I just am thinking about one incident when we were out working the route together. I remember, I think I was like hanging the route at the time, and Chris was like, "You're really close." And I remember distinctly thinking, I thought he was just telling me that to make me feel better.
Right.
Like, I didn't think there was any truth to that at all. And I remember kind of like resenting it even, like why would he even say that? Like,
Is he trying to sabotage me?
yeah, or just like, you know, try to make me feel better but not be real. I don't know. It's very complicated and it's confusing, and I'm still in the process of trying to figure out exactly why the dynamic is so different with my partner versus with Chris versus other partners. But I think the main thing that's helped me is recognizing those thoughts that go through my head when, say, Chris says something to me, and just recognizing it as a thought only. You know, the mind does this. It goes into this kind of mind chatter, and not putting so much, not contemplating it so much, you know,
Right.
and just trying to focus on what you're doing that day, focus on the climbing.
How did Chris feel about his portrayal of it?
You know,
In the film?
he mentioned to me that he thought he was kind of the one that looked kind of quote unquote bad in the film. You know, there were like shots of him being kind of goofy and whatnot, but we honestly like haven't talked about it a ton because it is a difficult subject together.
Sure.
But I don't think that he thinks he comes across as very bossy. And I think he is pretty defensive about, hey, I helped you a lot on that route, which I can't deny at all. Like, he helped me so much, you know, on that route. And, but I think that the dynamic between men and women is just different. And
It is, for sure.
yeah, and he has been climbing longer than me, and he did, you know, kind of fall into this a bit of a mentor role. And so I'm not faulting him at all for that, but I think that sometimes, like his one comment in the film of, you know, like, no matter what I say, like, it doesn't matter, like, when women are in a bad place or something to that effect, like, real dismissive.
When a woman's in a dark place,
Yeah.
you can't reason with her or something
That's
like that.
the one, yeah. And I feel like that's such just a wall and a defense mechanism, and it's so easy for guys to just kind of feel like, oh, whatever, like they're being irrational.
Yep. Yeah, you know, and to be honest, I think the whole, like you said, he doesn't think he comes across as bossy, or he doesn't think he is bossy. You said in your blog that you felt he was being too bossy. or that he came across as bossy in the film, right?
Yeah.
You didn't want him to be bossy
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
And I think that also is I've been in his shoes for sure, and that's why I'm saying this, where I felt like I'm giving you that beta to help you.
Absolutely.
That's what I'm here to do. I'm here to help you. But what she needed at that time wasn't that kind of help.
Yep.
That was the kind of help I thought she needed, not what she needed.
Right.
And I think that's an easy place for a guy to go.
Yeah.
And it might be the wrong place.
Well, I think it's two-sided. I think for me, I need to realize that what he was saying was coming from from a good place in his heart. Like, he really wanted me to succeed on the route. I think that having communication about, like you were saying, like maybe instead of, telling me what I should be doing and I should be doing it differently, maybe just be there, just be supportive and say, hey, if you need something, ask me, versus like throwing out beta or
totally.
Like in the film, I think Chris had said something about, Heather's doing it all wrong. Like, she shouldn't be trying to red point right now. She should learn the gear fully and then do this and that. And I think that kind of those kinds of overt statements, I feel like are this is so, like, maybe this is adding into the gender kind of bias, but I feel like that's way more male than female to be like, you're doing
stereotypical
this,
male.
you're doing this wrong, like that overt confidence. And I mentioned that in my blog. Like, I feel like I would never tell someone that. I would never be like, you're doing this all wrong, because maybe you're not. Maybe you're actually going to send,
You did it, so
and then
you're
it
doing
worked.
something right.
Yeah. So those kinds of statements, I think it's a lot easier for men to be just like really confident in their statements.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I fall into that trap pretty often.
Well, in your role too, with coaching and whatnot.
Right.
I'm sure there's a fine balance there.
Yeah, well, I'm constantly trying to keep myself in check and trying to understand what is my motivation for saying these things the way I'm saying them, and what will be most effective, and what does this person need? Even if it's not the most effective thing in my mind, what is it that they need? You know? And I know you've worked with Arno.
Absolutely.
And something I learned from Arno in one of our conversations was that it was really important to ask how my climber wants to be coached. If Annalisa is climbing, I can't just effectively coach her the way I want to be coached. I'm okay with somebody just yelling at me.
Sure, it's super individual.
She's not that way at all. So if she wants me to be supportive, then tell me that. If she wants me to be quiet, then tell me that. And now I ask, what do you want up there? What do you need up there?
Yeah, I love that.
And then I try to embody that while she's climbing, and sometimes I fall out of that, right back into that. Here's what you should be doing.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to get away from that.
But what you said, and I wanted to touch on too, you really think about the motivation behind what you're doing. And I've done kind of a lot of soul searching in the past year and a half and exploring my motivation with climbing. And Arno's helped me through this. And basically, I think for years, my motivation was largely achievement-based motivations.
Right.
Like, oh, if only I can climb this next grade. And, did that in sport, did that a little bit, dabbled in bouldering, and then it's like, oh, in trad, and it's always the next best thing. And I think it's something that's ingrained in us as Americans, because it's kind of like the same idea, right? Like, I graduate and then I get a really good job.
Right.
And then I buy a house, and then I get married, and then I have kids, and then, enter the next whatever. And it's like, hey, like, let's stop focusing so much on the next big achievement in your life, and maybe let's try to focus on like why you're doing the things you're doing.
Right.
Like what you just touched on with coaching. And so I've really kind of had to come back to a beginner perspective. When I first started climbing, I was climbing because it's so fun and it brings you outdoors and with these great people, and it challenges your mind and your body and all of these things that I had to really like think about and come back to.
Yeah, it shouldn't be a stressful thing for us at all.
Yeah.
Beyond the stress of, trying to do your best when it's time to do your best.
Right. And also something I talk about with Arno often is like embracing the stress, you know, like maybe not pushing it so much out of your comfort zone that you're, so extremely uncomfortable. But, when we push our limits in climbing, we want the stress, coming back to that realization that we're doing this to ourselves. We want to get on something hard because it does push us and we want to be in that stress versus...
And we like that feeling.
Yeah.
As opposed to, I hate it and I feel bad about myself.
Right. I'm not strong enough. Why isn't this hold better? Blah, blah, blah. All of this mind chatter.
Yeah. Yeah. Going back to that achievement-based motivation idea, I think that's part of where that male proclivity to jump straight to giving beta and giving you the way to do it. This is the right way. This is what you should be doing. And I notice that same motivation in myself, and I see it in a lot of coaches, and it's something we talk a lot about in our workshops that we do with coaches, that it feels really great to us to say, here's the beta, here's how you do it, then the person does it, and then we feel like we just achieved something.
Absolutely.
Like, look what I helped you do. And in reality, you didn't teach them anything. You gave them the sequence, they did it, they didn't become a better climber. You just handed them something, really.
Yeah.
But it feels like success.
Right.
And I think we love that feeling. So we're trying to constantly, we as humans, love that feeling. So we're constantly trying to speed up and get more of that, And I think that's where that you're doing it wrong. You should be doing it like this.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's part of where that comes from. Like we want to
it's a little ego driven
as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, very ego driven.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was really interesting. After I sent China Doll, I did go through a period of like a little mild depression almost, because it was like, what do I do next?
Right.
Like, how do I top this achievement?
Right. Did you feel like you had to do something bigger?
Well, yeah, like my mind was kind of spinning, but then at the same time, it took so much out of me that the thought of it like was kind of crushing. And so it was really fortuitous that I kind of ran into Arno at an OR show like a year and a half ago, and all of these kind of little stepping stones were set in place for me. Mm-hmm. I had a lot of help along the way as far as like really addressing my issues of self-worth and my motivation in climbing and in life. So it's been an interesting journey, and it's a process that will continue.
Yeah,
for the
I
rest
think
of my
when
life.
we wrap our identity up in this thing, and
Absolutely.
we all do to some degree. I'm a climber. That's become part of your identity.
Right.
And when you do this, when you achieve this big thing, then you automatically, we're sort of programmed to want to keep achieving more.
Yeah.
So you question, what's my identity if I can't do more?
Right. And like, what's the point of doing like more 13As or something? Like I just like didn't really have any kind of direction anymore. Chris always tells me that I'm a happier person when I have a project because I have all of this like direction in my life. But I think that it was really like beneficial for me to have that time and that introspection afterward.
Yeah.
It's really hard to kind of confront those deeper kind of aspects of your life. It's so easy, I think, to get caught up in like a rat race, and you're like, this is what I'm doing every day, making yourself so busy that you don't have time to think about like deeper meanings of what you're doing with your life.
Yeah.
And I did that for years, as a veterinarian, it's just like super busy.
Sure.
And all my days off, I was just like out projecting rock climbs, so
Right.
no time to address any of those like deep, dark secrets that get kind of swept under the rug for many years.
Yeah.
And eventually all that stuff surfaces, and
It surfaced in a big way for you.
yeah, with China Doll, because like you were saying, in part, it is such a stressful experience. So all that stuff comes out.
Did you know that while it was being filmed? Like, were you sensing that you didn't like the way things were working out?
Not at all. Actually, when John was filming, it was actually really nice to have someone else out there. So, at least most of the time.
Yeah.
There was always this sense of pressure, though, in the back of my mind, like, all these people are out here supporting me. Like, John is coming out, like, all these days, and Chris is here, like, every day, like, belaying me. And, like, I had this overwhelming sense of, like, I'm being really selfish, and, like, I'm not even close, and, like, I'm wasting people's times, and, all of these deep, dark thoughts
Right.
that stem from, like, ego and like lack of self-worth. But it was actually really fun when John was up there filming, because it was kind of like I had a little buddy up there.
Yeah,
Because it's kind of scary, but I'd just like look over and be like, hi again, John, how's it going?
Everybody needs a little John up on the route.
Yeah, exactly. But that said, there were some days where, if I was making negative progress, which were quite a few days, where it was like I just felt that pressure, like John's there and he's like, he's judging me or something, like
Right.
she's like not doing really well, like what the hell or something like
Yeah,
that.
it's funny how easy that is for us to fall into.
Yeah,
Because we all suck half the days.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We
Yeah.
all do. That's just the way it is.
yeah,
But when you're not performing well, you think you're the worst rock climber ever.
oh yeah. And I was the worst about that. Like there were times where I was just like, I'm supposed to be a professional rock climber, and like I totally suck. Like, what am I doing with my life?
Right.
What is wrong with me? Like, and just these thoughts of like, yeah, people are probably judging me, and but the truth is, like, everyone judges everyone else. And
Yeah, for sure.
honestly, like, we are the worst critics. We are the worst judges of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time, people are too busy worrying about what they're doing with themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. So we only saw like 20 minutes of the time. I don't remember the length of the film, but
Yeah.
we saw around 20 minutes of what happened in those 70 attempts or whatever.
Yeah.
And we get this picture of it that, like I said before, gave me a little bit of a bad taste, made you feel sad for that girl. Is that the overwhelming feeling you have of the experience? Or does the film portray a different thing?
That's a great question. I'd say the film does a great job of demonstrating a lot of the stressors involved with climbing that route. I mean, there were a lot of days where I would wake up in the morning and I couldn't eat because I was so stressed out, or I'd like wake up the night before that I was going to try to lead it.
Yeah.
Because I had one attempt they showed briefly in the film. It was my first lead attempt, and I had placed 2 really small offset Metolius cams on this opening bulge. It's probably like a V5 or something. It's really slick and insecure and bouncy. And I fell and I ripped those 2 pieces out. I fell onto a 000 C3, the smallest cam made. And there were 2 other cams, like a number 1 and 2, I believe, in a horizontal crack, like 15 feet below that. So I wouldn't have decked, but it was like...
Still a big, scary
It was
fall.
so scary. It was a big, scary fall. I fell onto the 000. It held. But I kind of fell upside down onto this ledge, and I was just like terrified. It's like the
Yeah.
worst feeling, when you're like ripping out gear and you're falling onto a ledge. And I just remember after that, like, yeah, I would wake up. I wouldn't be able to eat before the climb. During the climb, I'd maybe like eat a bar or something. I probably lost like 5 pounds like in that span because it was so stressful, you know?
Yep.
And I had to just convince myself that like it was going to be okay. Like, don't think about it. Like, just place your gear and don't think about it. Like, don't think about pieces ripping anymore and just like focus on what you're doing, because otherwise that kind of like fear can take over, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And you said in your blog that in the film, it is portrayed as if Chris is belaying you when you did it. But you said in the blog that isn't actually the case, that he left and 2 weeks earlier.
Yeah.
And your friend was belaying you.
Yeah. That was a really hard time for me. You know, Chris had planned to take a trip and meet up with some guy friends in Switzerland. And, you know, I felt like this deep sense of like, he's leaving me, like he's abandoning me. And this stems from my like deep childhood, like issues and whatnot, this whole abandonment idea. You know, he was just going on his trip that he had planned on.
Right.
But to me, it was like he was my main partner. And when you're climbing on something really hard that's traditional, like there's kind of a lot of logistics with the belay too.
Yeah, totally.
And just the trust issues, you know. So when he left, I was like recruiting all sorts of people that I had never really, a couple people I'd never climbed with before.
Right,
I'm like, will you belay me on my 514 trap climb, please? Yeah. And then thankfully my friend Molly, my girlfriend Molly, she was around. And so we would switch days, you know, she would work on her project. And then the next day she'd belay me on mine. And it worked out really well. But you're right. It's just adding to another, like, why didn't they include like my girlfriend belaying me in the movie? It's kind of another gender issue that, you know, it's inaccurate, but it fulfilled, they wanted to fulfill a certain storyline, you know, and I guess that's why it's a movie. It's not real life.
Sure. Yep.
But yeah, that was a little upsetting, but I do understand that they kind of wanted to keep with like this story of Chris and I's partnership more than bringing in another character or whatnot. But I definitely wanted to address Molly in my blog and just to let everyone know that like often in the hardest times in life and your relationship, like who's really there for you? It's your girlfriends, you know?
Yeah. How much do you think that played into your send? I mean, did it once you had a steady partner back at the route and Molly was there for you, did the experience change? Like when it was no longer this tough relationship that you have with your significant other, which a lot of us do when we go climbing with our significant others. It can be really tough.
Yeah.
Once that was gone, did something change?
Yeah. Actually, I haven't really thought about that too much. I'd say that the consistency of having Molly there every other day to get me on my project is ultimately what led to my success, because at that point it kind of becomes like a game of like roulette. Like you're like, okay, it's going to happen. Just like, you know, you need to try a bunch. One of these times it's going to happen, but you got to put your time in. But that is an interesting question. You know, Chris has belayed me on a lot of the hard routes that I've done, so I can't really say that like I don't have the ability to, you know, focus on what I'm doing, the task at hand, as him as my belayer.
Not that Chris is necessarily detrimental to your success.
No, he's super.
I don't mean it that way at all.
Yeah,
but
he's very supportive.
But I know that when something is, like I mentioned with Annalisa earlier, this emotional zenith that she was at, I just made it too much.
Right.
You know, and this was an emotional route for you.
Yeah.
You know, that you were dealing with some heavy emotions on.
Yeah. So. You know, I think I would have to say that like most of the emotional stuff that would happen would be like after my attempts on the route. I do have the ability like to really focus on the attempts. It's more like the aftermath.
Sure.
So yeah, with Molly, I do believe that there was less like emotions after. It was more just like excitement and like support.
Yeah.
Versus like questions of self-worth and like deeper emotional stuff. It's a double-edged sword, right? Like in a lot of ways, it's so great to be able to just to like share those deep-seated emotions with someone.
Yeah.
But it's also like really hard.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Yeah.
It's very hard.
Yeah.
I've talked for quite a while about trying to do a series of climbing couples podcasts.
Cool.
And, everybody sit down together and let's fight it out if we have to, And I think it could be really revealing because it's really hard. Annalisa and I definitely deal with it. I see a lot of other couples deal with it where the raw emotion comes out, whether you want it to or not.
Right.
And then you can apologize 30 minutes later in the car and everything's fine. But I think Annalisa hit on it when she said, I have this much emotion capacity and you made me go overboard, So
Yeah.
I think that happens pretty often. And I don't know. I think there are times when she's working on something and I need to say, you should come out here with your girlfriends.
Right. Yeah.
Like you guys should come out here and do this together because I'm not capable right now of backing away enough.
Yeah.
Whether I want to be or not, I know I'm an emotional trigger.
Yeah.
I know if I have the slightest bit of anxiety in my voice when I'm talking to you, you're going to pick up on it immediately and it's going to cause a fight or at the worst cause you to perform poorly, or at the best cause you to perform poorly. and that's not what needs to happen right now. So
yeah.
maybe bring your girlfriends out for this.
Yeah,
one,
I think that's great. I think ultimately it's about communication, like what do you need right now? And that goes far beyond just, being a belayer or a climbing partner, right? It's about being like the ultimate, like any kind of great relationship, right?
Exactly.
Communication.
Every part of it needs that.
Yeah, and I feel really lucky in that, like, Chris and I's climbing relationship is really solid and we have so much fun, like 98% of the time.
Right.
But, again, like we've said, with the huge stress, it's hard. And, we were both working on the route and like he would like give me the good temps, and just like all these dynamics of me feeling kind of guilty and all this stuff. But at the same time, Chris and I climb with other people quite often, know, and I think that it's great for couples to do that because you appreciate, your significant other that much more, like once you're kind of away from them for a little bit because you're like a little bit more in that comfort zone versus like having kind of random belayers or just, friend belayers. So, but I think it's important to change it up and we do, and we both kind of travel separately too. I think it's healthy.
I do too, for sure. And, on that same communication topic, you said that this is kind of a tough subject for you and Chris to talk about still. Is what was highlighted in the film that you didn't like seeing? Is that something you guys have talked about and are trying to or have worked through?
Yeah, I definitely have addressed it and we have discussed it. And I think it's better. I think between me doing a lot of work on myself.
Yeah.
And also Chris knowing when, like, maybe not to push me or not to, say certain things that might trigger me. I think,
right.
I think it's helped a lot. I think that, maybe it's that I just put a lot of like pressure on myself, but I do think that period in my life, I was highly like unstable due to the stress of the climb and whatnot, and that I had a lot of growing to do with that. And yeah, it's just a continual process.
Totally is.
Yeah. And, Chris certainly has his issues and he has a lot of room to grow too. But I think we're in a lot better place.
That's good. That's good. And I'm glad that it's something you're both talking about.
Yeah.
And again, I know that this film can only highlight a small percentage of the interactions that happen. And if they were trying to portray this one aspect of the relationship, then we see even more of it, and it's even more highlighted and blown up.
Absolutely.
But I do think it is important for you both to be working toward a resolution.
Yeah.
Rather than you just saying, I need to work through my own self-doubt.
Right.
He has to take some responsibility as well and work through it with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm glad that's the case. I'm glad you're both on that same page.
Thanks, yeah.
So how's climbing feeling for you now?
It's great. I feel a lot better about it in general. I feel like a lot less of my ego is involved and wrapped up in climbing than it used to be. Even going into the gym here, it can be
gym's tough on the ego.
Super intimidating,
Yeah.
There's all these professional athletes and and it's really easy to
There's somebody in there saying that when they see you too.
Thanks. It's just so easy to let your mind go into places that are I'm not good enough.
Right.
Mm-hmm. But I think I've gotten to a place where it's a lot easier to, I think it ultimately comes down to focused attention and awareness. And so I've been doing a lot of drills and a lot of work with Arno and just in general, therapy and all sorts of work on myself. And I think what it comes down to is being able to focus on what you're doing, right? Because the moment that you start even looking around the gym and you're noticing all these people and what they're doing, that's when the mind chatter begins. And
Right.
it's why do we even do that to begin with? If you can stay focused, hey, I really want to do this boulder problem, then stay focused on your boulder problem and stay curious. That's another thing that we've been working on is keep your motivation about learning versus achievement.
Yep.
Because there's always something to learn,
Totally.
something to gain. And if that's all you focus on versus the end goal, then you're gonna have a lot more fun in the process.
Yeah, definitely. And the first interview I did with Arno for the podcast, we talked a little about his work with you, and so I know that he'd be okay with this question. And actually, I told him I was going to be reaching out to you, and he thought that was a good idea.
Cool.
What are some of the things that you do? Are they, are there physical things that you're doing as drills, or are they all just mind exercises? What are you doing to get into this better place? Yeah,
that's a great question. So one of the drills that I do every morning, at least mostly every morning, is kind of a meditation drill, but we call it a situational awareness drill, where basically I'm standing and closing my eyes and I'm changing my focus. I'm first starting the focus on my feet and then on my ankles and then, bottom of my leg, top of my leg, hips, and etc. And then it's about, you do that for about 30 seconds, 45 seconds, and then it's switching into a compartmentalization where you have awareness of the bottom half of your body and how it's rooted into the ground, and then the top half of your body and how it's kind of reaching up toward the sky. And then the third part is coming into your senses. So awareness of breathing, and also awareness of things like hearing, touch, and sight. So obviously open your eyes at that point and just observe. And so practicing these things without judgment, for instance, not looking at an object and saying, oh, there's a table and it's dirty, I should clean it.
That's out of place.
And just say, there's like this cool like shape, smooth shape, and just observe.
Yeah.
And I think being able to, at different times in the day, to come back into your breathing and your senses, like if you're in kind of gnarly traffic or something, to be able to come back to your breathing, come into your body and your senses, is super valuable.
Yeah.
And in climbing, being really attentive to your body, like for instance, for warming up, be really attentive, not just be like, I'm getting through my warm-ups, and rushing through or whatnot, which I used to have a tendency to do. Really focus on, again, each body part, and then your breathing, and then sensations.
Yeah.
And I think in times of stress, coming back to your breathing is what brings you back to the present and back into your real self, and not this mind chatter that could persist forever. I think a lot of my trouble in the past, and a lot of people's trouble, is like getting caught up in thinking too much, and just letting the wheels turn and race and go off into all different tangents. And then you feel this like deep sense of anxiety and lack of focus, and then you feel overwhelmed and you can't do anything.
Yeah. And I think the awareness part of that is a really big component. It's something that we coach a lot. Different aspects of being aware of certain parts of your body, putting your focus in different places while you're doing your warm-ups. And really what all that teaches you is how to become hyper aware of small little details. And in your case, and in all of our cases, frankly, if it's a detail like, those people are climbing harder than I am, they're probably watching me, flail on this V3 or whatever, then by becoming more aware, we can recognize that we're having that thought. Yeah,
and label it. It's just a thought.
And then just let it go.
Yep.
It doesn't need to affect anything.
Right.
It's human to have those thoughts.
Exactly. Understanding that that's human nature, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So that's helped a lot. Other practices are, not listening to music while training in any capacity, because it's a distraction, right? Mm-hmm. So again, being completely present with what you're doing at any given moment.
And I think you can learn over time, and people talk about this in meditation as well, that once you've practiced meditation for a long enough time, you could meditate on the bus on the way to work.
Yeah.
And I think that over time, if you learn to be really present in your training and in your climbing, then even if there is music present, it won't matter to you anymore.
Right.
You can be present within yourself while all of this chaos is going on around you.
Absolutely. I feel like
it's a practice. It has to start in the simplest place for it to start.
Yeah, but that's true. That's, I think, the ultimate test is trying to have kind of a meditative state in the midst of, kind of chaos.
Right.
So, yeah, that's when you need it the most, too. These
Yeah.
types of stressful situations. So.
Yep. Yeah, and something else I wanted to highlight is that all these, this drill that you just talked about is great. And I think it's a really great way to start your day to, if you find yourself spinning out of control, it's a great way to reroute yourself. And it can carry over to your climbing as well. Arno just came and took a workshop with us in Chattanooga. And I wish I'd have known that you were doing this drill before then, because it fits right into our workshop. We talk a lot about being able to put your focus on specific parts of your body so that you no longer have to focus on them. Put the focus there for a while, practice that, and then it becomes second nature to drive through your legs, to keep driving with the arm that you're moving off of.
Yeah.
And And by starting the way that you're starting, you're creating this awareness of your lower body, then of your upper body, and you're able to start taking that awareness and moving it to different things, focusing on smaller parts instead of just, oh, here's how I walk. You can focus on the smaller parts of how it works.
I think it's really key for projecting too, because projecting is all about paying attention to the subtlest things, the little subtleties, right? And it's also like what got me through the hard times is like making these tiny little progressions, right?
Right.
But the first step, I think, is awareness of like, well, maybe if I shift my hip slightly here, or if I, grab this hold slightly differently, then, all of these subtleties add up into success. So
yeah. So it's interesting that I know you're a projector and you love the process of projecting, and that you can find those small, tiny little successes, and latch onto those, and that's enough to keep you going. How do those not play into increasing your self-worth while you're working on a project?
I don't know if I understand that.
So I'm not sure that I'm wording it right. If you're finding all these small reasons to see success, why don't those small little reasons translate into feeling better about yourself?
Yeah, I think that most of the time it would, but I would have intermittent times of complete overwhelm. And
sure.
I think also for me, negative progress has always been the hardest. So when I'm having continual progress,
you just want it to be this linear.
Yeah, I want it to be linear.
Yeah,
no matter how long I've been projecting, I always have this disconnect of, hey, sometimes you're gonna have a day where you don't feel very well, or conditions suck or something, and so negative progress is part of the game. I think that I've gotten better about taking that situation and being like, okay, so I'm not going to make overt progress, but what can I learn? Can I adjust any kind of beta, or what can I gain from this burn? Because I'm not going to, get a high point or a low point or whatever.
Yeah. And you can always, even if you don't learn anything, even if you don't make any progress, you can always chalk it up to a fitness burn, and then it's a positive,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, it's definitely hard. When I first got on China Doll, I couldn't do more than 2 moves in a row on top rope,
right,
on the 13C part of it. And it would have been really easy to become completely overwhelmed at the thought of one day, sending the 14A part completely on gear.
Right.
It's so far away, right? So what got me through that process was just these little mini successes, I linked 5 moves in a row on top rope, and not jumping to the big picture.
Yeah.
So,
and I assume that's how you're also working on these self-confidence or self-worth issues.
Yeah, and I think
bits at a time and small successes.
Understanding that there is no end, same with climbing. Once you climb your project, there's no end. Well, hopefully you get to keep climbing, right? You get to pick a new one. So it's the same with all the mental stuff. It's I'm never going to just nail it. All of a sudden I'm going to be so solid, so mentally stable and healthy that, I've achieved it. No, it's always a process. I'll always be working on it.
Yeah, that's really cool. I'm glad that you're working on it, and I'm glad that it's working out for you, that climbing's in a better place for you than what you saw in that film when you watched it.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm really lucky to be able to live the type of lifestyle where I do have the time to focus on these things.
Totally.
I think mental health in our country is, it's a forgotten aspect of our lives, and it's the most important aspect of healthcare, really. So I feel really fortunate to be able to have more time in my life, to quit my job as a vet and to just climb, and in the interim, be able to explore all of these different things within myself.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I appreciate you taking the time out and letting me struggle through this conversation with you.
Thanks. It's been a pleasure. It's tough to talk about, but it's also really fun to talk about. So
Yeah, and I think it's an important topic. I think a
Yeah.
lot of people deal with it, and they don't necessarily deal with it out in the open. And I think it's going to be great for a lot of people to hear you talk about it as openly as you are.
that's my hope. I want people to know that they're not alone, and I've gotten so much outreach, especially from a lot of women, that they've just really appreciated the candidness in that film, and I think a lot of women don't feel so alone anymore
That's
in their
good.
thoughts. So.
That's really good. I was a little nervous that the film was going to be like every other climbing film and just be a celebration of ascend and disappear into the ether, And I know there's a much more important issue going on there, so
Great.
that's good to hear.
Thanks so much. Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Heather. I appreciate it. First off, thanks again, Heather, for being so open and candid. I really appreciate the good conversation. And I also want to say that after watching it again, the film still leaves a bit of a bad taste in my mouth, and it's not necessarily a knock on it. Not all films should leave you warm and fuzzy. And my reaction is likely a result of being a little mired into two different conversations. One of gender equality and stereotypes, which I continue to have private conversations about following episode 54 with Shelma Junn. And the other is that of how to be a better climbing partner, particularly with your significant other, which can be really, really difficult. And like I mentioned in the conversation with Heather, is something that I've been working hard on myself. And frankly, that's something that, judging by the film, that Chris Weidner needs to work on as well, along with Heather. And I really, truly hope they are. I'm also not sure how making a climbing film works, but editing Chris's voice into the Send footage and making it seem as if Chris were really there, that seems to have missed the intended point for me. Sometimes we do make these high-pressure situations more difficult for our significant others, and it's best if we can just get the hell out of the way while simultaneously working toward not adding any more pressure. And I wish that opportunity had been taken by the filmmakers, but again, I'm deeply mired in these conversations, so it seemed like an apparent thing to me. And maybe their storyline was that Chris and Heather worked through this together. Last, I want to say that I'm impressed by Heather for being more open than she has to. I've linked in the show notes to her blog post that we mentioned, and if you haven't read it, go do so. And she's also been really open about working with Arno Ilgner and how that's helped her. And I think that's incredibly important to show that being a physically and technically sound climber is only a small part of this much bigger process. And not everyone needs that, just like we don't all need the campus, but it would be great if we were open enough to share our mental practice on Instagram just as easily as we post moonboard videos. And I think that Heather's willingness will help with that. I'm sure that it will. And one more thing. I've been toying with this idea of doing a series talking to climbing couples. The benefits, the struggles, couples living in a van, couples who have different levels of commitment to their climbing, people with kids, with baggage, whatever. And if that's something you'd be interested in hearing, reach out. Let me know. You can find us on the internets at powercompanyclimbing.com, on the Facebooks and Instagrams at powercompanyclimbing. But don't be silly and go hunting for us on the Twitters, because like my dude Xander Taylor does every time he sends a boulder, we don't tweet. We scream like eagles.
This time, exceptions time to build. It's 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 time power. This time to build power. This time. It's time to build. 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 It's time